The phone buzzed 3 times on the kitchen counter before Claire even glanced at it. But when she did, her world tilted sideways in a way that made the coffee mug slip from her fingers and shatter across the tile floor. The screen glowed with a message preview that read, "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. We're that red thing I bought you," and beneath it, a name she didn't recognize, Vanessa. Claire's hands trembled as she reached for the device, not her husband Marcus's usual phone, but a second one she'd found tucked inside. His gym bag that morning, while searching for his Bluetooth earbuds he'd asked her to grab, the bag had felt heavier than usual, and curiosity, that dangerous thing that either saves you or destroys you, made her unzip the inner pocket. What she found wasn't just a phone, it was a portal into a life she didn't know existed, a parallel universe where her husband of 12 years was someone else entirely. She stood there in the kitchen, surrounded by shattered porcelain and spilled coffee spreading like a dark omen across the floor, holding this small black rectangle that contained enough evidence to demolish the life they'd built together, brick by careful brick. But Claire didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't call him, because sometimes the best revenge isn't hot, it's ice cold and carefully calculated. Before we continue, I see you watching but not subscribing, and it's completely free. I bring you these powerful stories daily, and I'm racing toward 1,000 subscribers. Help me reach that goal. It takes just 2 seconds. 3 hours earlier, Claire had been the kind of woman who believed in the goodness of people, especially the man she'd married, young and loved fiercely through every season of their shared life. She was the one who packed his lunches with little notes tucked inside, who supported his career moves even when it meant she had to put her own dreams on hold, who defended him to her mother when the older woman suggested Marcus was working too late, too often. Claire had been a believer, a keeper of faith, a woman who thought loyalty was currency that multiplied when you invested it wisely. But standing in that kitchen, scrolling through months of messages between Marcus and this Vanessa woman, watching their relationship unfold in emojis and promises and photos she could never unsee, Claire felt something inside her calcify into something harder than diamond. The messages went back 8 months, maybe longer if he'd been smart enough to delete the early ones, and they painted a picture of a man who'd been living a double life with an ease that suggested he'd done this before. Vanessa worked at his office. Of course she did, because clichés exist for a reason, and from what Claire could piece together, they'd been meeting at an apartment Marcus had rented under a business LLC she'd never heard of, spending weekends there while telling Claire he was at regional conferences or visiting potential clients. The apartment address was saved in his maps, and Claire screenshot everything, her hands steady now, her mind already 3 steps ahead. By the time Marcus came home that evening, whistling some tuneless melody and loosening his tie in the hallway, Claire had made 17 copies of everything she'd found, stored them in 3 different cloud services, sent encrypted files to her personal email, and consulted with her sister Rachel, who worked in real estate law, about property rights and what happens when one spouse secretly leases property without the other's knowledge. She'd also done something else, something that made her feel both powerful and slightly sick. She'd created a fake social media profile and sent Vanessa a friend request from an account that looked like a random mom blogger interested in connecting. Vanessa, young and apparently not very cautious, accepted within 20 minutes, and her entire life became an open book. Claire learned that Vanessa was 8 years younger than Claire, worked in marketing at Marcus's firm, posted gym selfies with captions about living her best life, and seemed to have no idea that Marcus was married, or at least that's what Claire wanted to believe, because the alternative was too ugly to process. Marcus kissed Claire on the cheek when he entered the kitchen, asked what was for dinner, complained about traffic, and performed the role of faithful husband with an actor's precision. Claire matched his performance, smiling, nodding, serving pasta with homemade sauce, asking about his day, all while the secret phone sat hidden in her purse, hanging by the door, a ticking bomb he didn't even know was about to detonate. She gave him exactly what he expected that night: normalcy, routine, trust, because the best trap is the one that feels like home. The lawyer's office smelled like old books and expensive coffee, and the woman behind the desk, Patricia Chen, had the kind of eyes that suggested she'd heard every story twice and believed none of them until proven otherwise. Claire laid out everything: printed messages, bank statements showing mysterious transfers she'd found by accessing their joint accounts online, photos of Marcus and Vanessa from her social media that Claire had carefully screen-saved, and the address of the secret apartment. Patricia listened without interrupting, making notes in shorthand that looked like bird tracks across yellow legal paper. And when Claire finished, the lawyer sat back in her leather chair and said something that changed everything. The apartment is being paid for with funds from your joint account, which means you have as much claim to it as he does. And if he's using marital assets to fund an affair, well, that changes the entire landscape of how we approach this. Claire felt something like hope mixed with vengeance bloom in her chest, a dangerous flower that smelled sweet and poisonous at the same time. Patricia outlined a strategy that was both elegant and brutal. Document everything. Don't confront Marcus yet. Gather more evidence if possible, and most importantly, start quietly protecting assets and establishing her own financial independence. I've seen this play out 100 times, Patricia said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone sharing a secret. The spouse who acts first, who stays calm and plans carefully, almost always comes out ahead. Claire left that office with a folder full of documents and a plan that would take 3 weeks to execute. 3 weeks during which she'd have to pretend everything was fine. Pretending became Claire's full-time job, and she was astonishingly good at it, which made her wonder if Marcus had felt this same strange split between the person you are and the person you're performing. She smiled at breakfast, made love to him twice that week with a detachment that felt like being underwater. Attended his company dinner, where she shook Vanessa's hand and complimented her dress, while knowing exactly what this woman's body looked like in Marcus's bed. Vanessa was pretty in that generic way that suggested expensive skincare and good lighting, with long dark hair and a laugh that sounded rehearsed. And when Marcus introduced them, Claire watched his face for signs of panic and saw none, just smooth confidence that made her realize he'd probably fantasized about this moment, having both women in the same room, oblivious to each other. But Claire wasn't oblivious anymore. She was hyper-aware, cataloging every glance, every word. Every time Marcus touched Vanessa's shoulder just a second too long while making some work-related point. During dessert, while Marcus was in the restroom, Vanessa leaned over and said something that nearly made Claire's mask slip. You're so lucky to have a husband like Marcus. He talks about you all the time, says you're the most understanding wife in the world. The irony was so thick, Claire could taste it, bitter and metallic like blood in her mouth, and she managed to smile and say, "Oh, I understand more than you know," watching the words sail right over Vanessa's head. That night, Claire added played nice at dinner to her mental list of things she'd one day tell this story about. When Marcus was nothing but a cautionary tale she shared over wine with friends. The breaking point came not with a bang but with a birthday cake, chocolate with buttercream frosting, sitting on the kitchen counter with Happy Birthday Claire written in elegant script across the top. Marcus had remembered. Of course he had, because even cheaters keep calendars, and he'd bought her a necklace. Something gold and delicate that probably cost whatever he'd spent on Vanessa's red thing. ×2, because guilt makes men generous. Claire's sister Rachel was there, her mother, a few close friends, and they sang and laughed. And Marcus played the doting husband so well that Claire almost believed it herself. Almost forgot about the phone and the apartment and the parallel life. But then his second phone buzzed in his jacket pocket, hanging on the chair by the door, and everyone heard it. That distinct vibration against wood and Marcus's face did something subtle, a micro-expression of panic that lasted maybe half a second before he covered it with a cough and an excuse about needing to check a work emergency. Rachel caught Claire's eye across the table, an eyebrow raised in question, because sisters know, they always know when something's wrong, even if they can't name it yet. Marcus stepped into the hallway and through the partially open door. Claire heard him whisper hiss into the phone. "I told you not to call this number when I'm home. Are you crazy?" And that's when Claire decided the 3 weeks of careful planning were over. That sometimes you have to trust your rage to show you the next move. The next morning, while Marcus was at the gym, his real gym this time because Claire had checked the credit card statement and seen the charge, she packed a suitcase with essentials, called Patricia Chen, and set a plan in motion that felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping you'd built wings strong enough to catch you. Patricia had already filed preliminary paperwork, and now it was time for the nuclear option. Claire had herself added as a resident to the secret apartment Marcus had been renting. used her legal right as a spouse whose joint funds were paying for it to get a key from the property management, and moved half of their important documents, her grandmother's jewelry, and anything else she couldn't bear to lose, into that space. The apartment was smaller than she'd imagined. A one-bedroom with tasteless furniture and sheets she refused to look at too closely. But it had something their house didn't. It was a space Marcus associated with freedom and secrets, and she was about to make it the cage that trapped him. She left a note on the kitchen counter of their real home, the one they'd bought together 7 years ago, with a mortgage that still had 23 years left on it. Gone to my mother's for a few days. Need some space to think. Don't call short vague, the kind of message that would make him worry just enough, but not panic. Not yet, because the best revenge isn't just about making them lose everything, it's about making them watch it happen, piece by piece, and understand exactly why. Marcus called 17 times that first day, left voicemails that progressed from confused to irritated to genuinely worried, and Claire listened to each one with the detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. By day 3, he showed up at her mother's house, and Claire, who'd warned her mother in advance, watched from the upstairs window as the older woman told Marcus that Claire needed time and space, and he should respect that. He looked smaller somehow, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched against the autumn wind, and Claire felt a pang of something that might have been sympathy, if it wasn't so thoroughly buried under layers of betrayal and calculated fury. Patricia called that afternoon with news that the preliminary financial investigation had revealed something interesting. Marcus had been siphoning money from their joint savings into a separate account for almost a year. Small amounts at first, then increasingly larger transfers that suggested he was building an exit fund, planning his own escape. Men like this, Patricia said, in her matter-of-fact way, they always have an escape plan. They just don't expect their wives to find it first. Claire felt vindicated and heartbroken in equal measure, because every new piece of evidence was both ammunition and confirmation that the man she'd loved had stopped being that person a long time ago. The trap was almost set. Just a few more pieces to move into place, and then Marcus would understand what it felt like to have the ground disappear beneath your feet. The confrontation happened not at home, but at the secret apartment, where Claire had arranged to meet Marcus under the pretense of talking things through in a neutral space. She gave him the address via text, watched the 3 dots appear and disappear as he typed and deleted responses, and finally got a simple. She arrived first, sat in the living room that still smelled faintly of Vanessa's perfume, and waited. The look on Marcus's face when he walked in and realized where he was that moment was worth every sleepless night, every fake smile, every ounce of self-control it had taken not to burn his clothes in the backyard. "How did you?" he started. But Claire held up her hand, and in her calmest voice, the one she used to use when explaining difficult concepts to the kids she used to tutor before Marcus convinced her to quit and focus on supporting his career, she said, "I know everything, Marcus. Vanessa, the money you've been hiding, the fact that you were planning to leave me but wanted to make sure you had everything set up first." She watched his face cycle through denial, anger, bargaining, all the stages of grief compressed into 30 seconds. He tried to explain, said words like mistake and didn't mean for it to happen, and you don't understand the pressure I've been under. But Claire wasn't interested in his narrative anymore. She had one question, just one, and his answer would determine exactly how merciless her revenge would be. "Did you ever love me, or was I always just convenient?" Claire asked, and the silence that followed was louder than any answer Marcus could have given. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the floor, and in that hesitation, Claire saw the truth that she'd been a placeholder, a safe choice, someone he thought would always be there while he explored what else life had to offer. "I did," he finally said, but the past tense destroyed whatever small part of her might have considered mercy. "I loved you when we got married, but people change. Claire, you have to understand that." She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and delivered the news that would remake his entire world. "This apartment, I'm keeping it. It's being paid for with marital assets, which means I have just as much right to it as you do, and I've already moved in. The house. We're selling it, and I get 60% because of the affair and the hidden assets. Patricia's already got a judge who agrees with her. Your secret bank account? Frozen, pending the divorce settlement. Vanessa, I sent her every screenshot, every message, every photo. And I attached your wedding photos just so she could see exactly who she was sleeping with. Marcus's face went from red to white, the color draining so fast Claire thought he might actually faint. "You can't do this," he whispered, but they both knew she already had. The revenge wasn't just about taking things from him, it was about making sure he understood that actions have consequences, that you can't build happiness on someone else's destruction and expect to keep your hands clean. Marcus became homeless not because Claire was cruel, but because he'd made a series of choices that left him with nowhere to land when everything fell apart. Vanessa, confronted with the evidence of his marriage and his lies, blocked him on everything, and filed a complaint with HR that got Marcus suspended pending investigation, because apparently their company had a strict policy about workplace relationships, and he'd lied on disclosure forms. His parents, traditional and religious, sided with Claire after she showed them a carefully edited version of the evidence, and his father told him he was no longer welcome in their home until he made things right, whatever that meant. The few friends Marcus had were mostly couple friends, and couple friends always side with the wife when there's infidelity involved. That's just social mathematics. He ended up in a extended stay motel off the highway, the kind of place with weekly rates and a vending machine that only took coins. And Claire knew this because his credit card statements still came to her email. She hadn't removed herself from account notifications. And watching him pay for increasingly cheaper accommodations was a kind of poetry. She didn't feel guilty. That was the surprising thing. She felt light, unburdened, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy backpack for years and finally set it down. Patricia called it a clean win, saying most divorce cases this messy took years to resolve. But Marcus's secret accounts and documented infidelity made everything fast and decisive. But the story doesn't end with Marcus in a motel and Claire victorious, because revenge is never quite as satisfying as we think it'll be when we're planning it in our darkest moments. 6 months later, Claire sat in the same apartment where she'd confronted Marcus, now decorated with her own furniture and plants that actually thrived under her care, and realized something that felt like wisdom earned through fire. The victory had been real. She'd kept her dignity, protected her assets, made sure Marcus faced consequences for his choices, but it hadn't healed the wound of betrayal. Hadn't made her trust easier or love simpler, or filled the empty space where her marriage used to be. She'd started therapy, not because she was broken, but because she was smart enough to know that surviving something doesn't mean you've processed it. And her therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Okafor, kept asking her the same question in different ways. What do you want your life to look like now that you're free to choose? Claire had been so focused on the revenge, on making Marcus pay, that she hadn't thought much about what came after, about who she wanted to be in this new chapter. She'd started painting again, something she'd loved in college but abandoned when Marcus said it was impractical, and her small canvases leaning against the apartment walls felt like evidence of a self she was slowly recovering. Her sister Rachel visited often, bringing wine and takeout and laughter that felt like medicine. And one night, after too much Merlot, Rachel said something that stuck with Claire like a blessing and a curse. You won, you got everything you wanted from him, but now you have to figure out what you want from yourself. And maybe that's the real story, not about phones and secrets and revenge, but about the moment you realize that winning the battle doesn't automatically mean you know how to live in the peace that follows. Claire never saw Marcus again after the divorce was finalized. Heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state. Started over in some small way, and she hoped, in a distant charitable corner of her heart, that he'd learned something from the wreckage. The apartment became a real home, not just a weapon or a trophy, but a place where Claire figured out that she liked her coffee extra strong in the morning, that she slept better with the window cracked open, that she was funny and capable and whole all by herself. The hook scene from the beginning, that moment in the kitchen with the shattered mug and the glowing phone, felt like it belonged to a different person now. Someone who'd been forced to choose between staying broken or becoming something harder and more resilient. She chose resilience, but she also chose softness, eventually learning that you can be strong enough to protect yourself and still open enough to let new people in. A year after everything, Claire went on her first real date with a man named Daniel who taught high school history and laughed at her jokes and didn't have a secret phone or a secret life. And when he asked about her past, she told him the truth in broad strokes, that she'd been married, that it ended badly, that she'd fought hard to rebuild. "Sounds like you're pretty tough," Daniel said. And Claire smiled and replied, "I'm pretty wise now. There's a difference. The moral isn't that revenge is sweet, or that justice always wins, or that love conquers all, because life is messier than morals usually allow. The real lesson is this: when someone shows you who they really are through their choices and their secrets and their betrayals, believe them, protect yourself, and then do the harder work of building a life that doesn't revolve around their destruction, but around your own flourishing." If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the rubble of someone else's choices, know that you're not alone in, that the strength you think you're faking is actually the real thing, growing stronger every day you choose yourself.